Hey, hit that subscribe button now. You're going to like it.
Welcome to the Luke Branquinho Show. My next guest is not only a friend, but he is a doctor of internal medicine. And correct me if I'm wrong, Lonnie, that is your profession, but you also take care of us rodeo cowboys.
That is correct. I've been doing it for almost over 20 years now.
I honestly attribute one of my world championships to your help, because I'm sure you remember I came in and I couldn't hardly move. I was sick as a dog going into the 10th round of the national finals.
I do remember that. I remember looking at you in that corner going, boy, I don't know how he's going to ride tonight. He looks like, yeah. So it was you look pretty rough.
One other thing you talked about, because everything's evolving, changing, medicine, the body, and life expectancy. And you had me look at a site. It was Chat OpenAI or AI. Tell me about that, because I read it and it makes sense, but if for me to try to explain it, I'd confuse the hell out of everybody.
So I think I've had this discussion with my wife, and she's like, sometimes you just don't need to be that, you don't have to go down all these roads. But OpenAI or ChatGPT, if you haven't heard about it, it's going to change the world that we know right now. And what it does, it's like a supercomputer that can take all the information out there. So think of any book you've read, something you enjoyed or something that you did, and you want to tie all those pieces together. You read something about one of your athletes that you one of the rodeo cowboys that you admired your whole life, but you also said, I want to understand, is there a component of his genetic history that I can find? I mean, ChatGPT, that realm allows us to search and then have it identify in text what was going on. I mean, it's like taking a book and saying, could you please redefine what happened let's take a real cowboy show. Is there any reality in the show Lonesome Dove? And if there is, can you please identify what components of that show were realistic? It would be able to go through the movie Lonesome Dove, the script of Lonesome Dove, anything that has ever been written about it, and then generate a response. That may be a 2.5-page response or a 15-page response, but it will generate the response independently of what you're doing. Now you think about that, if you're a college student and somebody says, well, we want you to write your concept of the old man in the sea and what you believe, and you can do that. You can do it with Chat. It'll generate a whole story for you to present to your professor. So it's going to change how we look at the world. But right now, universities are trying to figure out how are they going to get, how do they know that this AI system, this artificial intelligence, isn't being used by all of our students? And the smartest students out there are figuring out ways to make this work for them. I was listening to another podcast earlier today with Lex Friedman. He's another individual, but it was interesting that he was talking to the guys that were Dr. Dennis White, who is one of the physicists at MIT, and they were talking about this whole thing about fusion energy. But what he did come up with this concept, they both were talking and says, what if this OpenAI ChatGPT, this artificial intelligence, is the one that comes up with the next major breakthrough in whatever, science, engineering, it doesn't matter where you find it. It produces a question, a hypothesis, and an answer that we didn't do on our own. I mean, all the things that we've done up to this point, it's human. The human mind has been the one that's generated these concepts. But I don't think people really understand how quickly our knowledge is going to grow in the next 5 years. It's going to be absolutely phenomenal.
Was this the same, this chat that you were telling me about with the clean energy, you said makes energy similar as the sun and with no.
That's the fusion energy. So fusion and what's interesting about that whole thing, it's a little hard to. I mean, I love the science, but it's difficult to explain. But what it is and Dr. Dennis White explains it with he's on this podcast with Lex Friedman. But pretty much it's like when they produce this energy, it requires so much heat to make this fusion. And what the fusion is taking two hydrogen atoms, pushing them together to fuse them together to make helium. That concept produces energy. The point that happened in December of this last year was that they were able to produce more energy than it required to push the program together. So for the first time ever, the fire that was lit outlasted the match that lit it, which is like a huge, I mean, people don't really get it, but the point is that it's the first time where they've been using this fusion energy that they produce more than it required them to get the fusion started. And the world, it will change on how this moves forward. Now, how quickly will that take place? I don't know. There's going to be a lot of engineering. There's going to be a lot of physics that have to be identified just for the process to be completed. But it's energy that there's no carbon footprint. This energy that's produces heat, but there's no CO2 released, and there's nothing into the environment that's released other than the heat.
The cleanest energy possible.
The cleanest energy possible with the lowest risk. And there's reasons that risk is low. It's not nuclear medicine. It's not nuclear energy, which people need to understand. It's not a radiation energy form, because that's fission. That's when you break something apart. Fusion is when you put it together. And because it's fusion, it's much more safe than what we'd have with the nuclear energy. So if that really can come into play, that'll change the whole world. I mean, technically, it'll change everything we know about the world.
Thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for educating these listeners on everything that you've educated me on.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Luke, for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet, and we'll talk to you soon.